Now, Gautama's teachings, the Four Noble Truths, his Eightfold Path, starts out as a very small sect in India. Again, they don't fully reject the philosophies and the reasoning behind Hinduism, but they do challenge its practices, its rituals, and its ceremonies, which really gains Siddhartha and his followers a lot of attention very, very quickly. And his teachings become very popular in India, especially among the lower classes, because he rejects the severeness of the caste social stratification in India. According to Siddhartha, anyone with the right amount of meditation can release their desires and achieve nirvana, which tends to go against the very conforming view of Hinduism, where certain social classes are what they are and they're never going to be more than that. So, as the teaching spread, as he becomes more popular, Siddhartha becomes known as the Buddha or the Enlightened One. Okay. His message continues to gain popularity throughout the BC, throughout the centuries, especially under the Mauryan Empire, specifically Emperor Ashoka, who, after years of conquest and bloodshed, um, devotes his life to promoting Buddhist living, the Eightfold Path, the kind of peaceable nature of that religion. And Ashoka builds temples, he builds monasteries, he builds stupas dedicated to Buddhist teaching. For those of you that didn't do the reading, a stupa is a giant stone pillar that is dedicated to some specific topic. Now, the Buddha is just a man, okay? And that's important to remember because, in a lot of Judeo Christian thinking, right? Um, the person bringing the message is, a god or a prophet or something like that. They're bringing the word of some higher power to you. But at the end of the day, the Buddha is not that. He is just an enlightened, very important teacher, essentially. Um, and like all men, he eventually dies. And after the Buddha dies, his followers begin to compile his writings into, essentially sacred texts. And with the Buddha gone, now what you see is people begin interpreting and expanding upon his teachings. And you start to see some variations, some branching out in Buddhism. The two main branches of Buddhism that developed during this time are what's known as Theravada. This is kind of the original form of Buddhism. It's very philosophical in nature. The Buddha is seen as the enlightened one and a great teacher, but he is not a god by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and in this version of Buddhism, the quest for nirvana it is self-driven and it is strictly through meditation. This is the very ascetic, very self-disciplined version of Buddhism. This is the one that is practiced by Buddhist monks who shave their head and give up their worldly possessions and they devote themselves to monasteries where they meditate and, try to attain enlightenment. Okay. However, not everyone has the ability to devote themselves so thoroughly and so, rigidly to meditation and those things. So, what develops out of that is what's known as Mahayana Buddhism. This is, for lack of a better term, kind of the popular form of Buddhism. Um, the teachings of the Buddha are adapted, they're interpreted. This form of Buddhism is much more spiritual and godly in nature. Um, the Buddha is basically deified and he is worshipped as a god. And the strictness of Theravada Buddhism is lessened. The path to enlightenment is kind of made easier for those who cannot, so rigidly devote themselves to it. And new avenues of attaining enlightenment, become available. Works of devotion or pious works, acts of devotion, things like donating time or money to Buddhist temples, doing, morally good things within your caste or within your neighborhood, studying under enlightened men called bodhisattvas. These are people who, supposedly have already attained enlightenment, but rather than leave and go join the Brahman, they have remained, they have kept their Atman in the earthly sense to enlighten others and help others reach enlightenment. So this is kind of more of a user friendly version of Buddhism.